Did you know that over half of all known species on Earth are parasitic at some point in their life cycle? I mean, that is just a staggering thought, right? So let's dive right into this explainer and trace the fascinating, highly structured transit system that parasites use to actually survive and multiply. When we hear the word parasite, we usually just think of a simple invader, kind of like someone crushing a party. But the truth is so much more complex and, honestly, elegant. We're actually looking at a highly evolved map of survival, where these organisms use other living beings as completely different types of stepping stones. Which really begs the question, how on earth does a parasite know exactly where to go? Rather than just wandering randomly through an ecosystem and hoping for the best, a parasite acts like a microscopic traveler with a very specific, strictly biological itinerary. They don't just jump into any host blindly. They've spent millions of years evolving to utilize highly specific hosts for very distinct, absolutely mandatory phases of their life cycle. To make sense of all this, we're going to map out the 5 distinct stops on this biological journey. We'll be hitting the final destination, essential layovers, the waiting room, parasite safe houses, and finally, the dead end. Let's start right off with stop number 1, the final destination, also known as definitive hosts. By definition, a definitive host is where the adult parasite lives and undergoes sexual reproduction. You can think of this as the ultimate final destination, where our microscopic traveler finally unpacks its bags, settles down, and gets to work creating the next generation. And this step is absolutely crucial. Without successfully reaching this very specific host, the parasite's genetic line just dies out entirely. The whole shebang stops right there. The malaria parasite is a perfect example of this. It actually undergoes sexual reproduction inside the mosquito. So while we humans generally think of mosquitoes as just annoying pests, well, pests that carry disease, obviously, biologically speaking, the mosquito is the main event. It's the definitive host for malaria. Now, humans can definitely be definitive hosts too. In fact, for the majority of human parasitic infections like malaria or roundworms, we are the ones hosting that permanent residence. But for malaria, the mosquito holds the top title. So, if you're ever trying to figure out what type of host you're looking at, just remember this golden rule. Sexual reproduction equals final destination. If sexual reproduction is happening, you're looking at a definitive host, period. But as we all know, you can't always get a direct flight, right? Parasites often need what we can think of as an essential layover, which brings us to stop number 2. Enter the intermediate host. This is where the larval stage of the parasite lives, or where asexual multiplication takes place. Here, the parasite is literally forced to undergo crucial larval development or multiply asexually before it can move on. It's not the final stop, but it is an absolutely mandatory phase of the journey. Unlike an accidental bump in the road, the parasite cannot mature without this specific layover. Now here is where it gets kinda wild. Some complex parasites require a first and a second intermediate host. Let's jump back to Plasmodium, the parasite that causes malaria. We humans actually act as the intermediate host because that's where the asexual multiplication happens, right inside our red blood cells. We're just the layover. Other parasites might require sequential layovers through totally different species, jumping from, say, a snail to a crab, just to complete their larval stages before they can finally seek out their definitive host. It is an incredibly delicate chain of events. Sometimes, though, a parasite gets stuck in transit and needs a temporary vehicle just to bridge a gap in its journey. And that brings us to stop number 3, which is a really fascinating adaptation. Welcome to the parotenic host. This is a host where the larval stage remains completely viable, but without any further development. Think of this host as a biological waiting room. The parasite doesn't grow here, it doesn't multiply, it just goes entirely dormant, surviving and hitching a ride until it can be passed on to a host where it can actually continue its life cycle. Literally zero growth is happening. Imagine a fish swallowing up an infected water flea. That fish becomes exactly this kind of waiting room. It now carries a viable larvae inside its tissues. But the key thing to remember is that inside the fish, there is absolutely no parasite development going on. The fish is acting purely as a transit vehicle, carrying that dormant parasite for months, maybe even years, until a larger predator, like a bear, or maybe a human eating undercooked catch, eats the fish, and boom, the infection is finally transmitted to a place where it can actually grow.
So the crucial takeaway here is this massive biological distinction. Intermediate hosts are strictly for active development or multiplication, while paratenic hosts are strictly for passive transport. Essentially, one is a factory and the other is just a bus.
Moving right along to stop number 4, parasite safe houses, also known as reservoir hosts. To understand how infections manage to stick around in an environment, even when we try our absolute hardest to eradicate them, we have to look at reservoir hosts. By definition, this is a host that harbors the parasite and acts as a continuous source of infection to others in an endemic area. These hosts serve as biological safe houses. And honestly, this is exactly why eradicating certain diseases is such a nightmare for public health scientists. Because even if we cure every single human in a village, the parasite is just quietly hiding out in these animal safe houses in the surrounding forest, keeping the population alive and just waiting to reemerge. And finally, stop number 5. What happens when a parasite takes a wrong turn and boards the wrong biological transit line? Well, nature is highly structured, but mistakes definitely happen. And this results in what we call an accidental host. This is a host where the parasite isn't usually found, but more importantly, it's a host where the parasite cannot complete its life cycle. It's a dead alley, the parasite gets completely trapped. From the parasite's perspective, this is a massive biological mistake, and its transmission journey abruptly stops forever. When we put these last two concepts side by side, a really clear picture emerges. On one hand, you've got the reservoir host, which acts as a continuous infection source and lets the life cycle perpetually thrive. And then, on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you have the accidental host, which serves as a total biological dead end where the journey completely fails. Take the parasite that causes hydatid disease as a real-world example of this. Dogs act as the reservoir, safe houses. They harbor the adult parasite and act as a continuous source of infection to their natural intermediate hosts, like sheep. But look what happens when a human accidentally picks it up. The parasite forms a cyst in the human liver, a condition called cystic echinococcosis. But because humans aren't naturally preyed upon by dogs to continue that cycle, we become a complete biological dead end. For that specific parasite, the journey is officially over. So, pulling this all together, every single host plays a highly specific role in the survival map of a parasite. Whether it's the final destination of a definitive host, the essential layover of an intermediate host, the passive transport of a paratenic host, or the safe house of a reservoir host. By understanding these distinct stops, this seemingly chaotic world of parasitology actually reveals itself to be a brilliantly structured system. It really makes you stop and wonder about the invisible journeys happening within ecosystems every single day, doesn't it? Take a look around you. Look at the pets in your home, the wildlife outside, and yeah, even yourself. In the unseen, microscopic world around us, what kind of host are you right now?